We were talking about disciples and discipleship in last week, and I want to pick up on that and talk about cross-training. Go a little bit farther, making of a disciple. If things is going to change in this church, in this community, in this state, in this nation, God has put the church here to do that. And what that is making disciples. It's interesting in Matthew 28 where he says, "Go ye therefore, making disciples." That Greek phrase, making, is a process. In other words, you never get to the point where you said, "I've been discipled," and stop. That happens when you check up out of here, all right? And you get to heaven. But other than that, it is a process where you are making, being discipled and discipling someone else. If you want to tap into the Christian life and pull out of it, you must get to that. That's the reason church don't satisfy people. I hear it 1,000 times. "I've tried church, I've tried this, and I've tried that." I know, but if you tried God's method, you can try church, you can try a lot of religious activities, and it'll leave you the way that you found it, empty, broken. It may cause you to, fix up a little bit what you think's religious and external, but that's all it can do for you. And so if we're going to make a dent and do what God has called us to do, being salt and light, it is making disciples. And you cannot make a disciple without some cross-training. Now, cross-training, if you was just to put in, is when you're going to try and you're going to go and try to get fit for something. And maybe you're going to run a 5K. Maybe you're going to do a half marathon. Maybe you're trying to go to the next level and you start training. Well, this is what Jesus did with the disciples. And so I want to introduce them to you, introduce this process of what the Lord calls discipleship, tagging on of last week's message. And here's the good thing. He uses ordinary folk. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church has sainthooded these apostles, stained glass them as something that they're not. These are ordinary men that God called and used in extraordinary ways. In Luke chapter number 6, and I am getting used to some things here, so I'm going to have to switch off because I'm not seeing real well. This is what it says. It says, "And Jesus continued," verse number 12. Verse number 12, it says, "And it came to pass in those days." Whenever the phrase uses that, in those days, is a segmented time period. So when Luke is recording this is the third time. I'll show you here in a little bit, but it's the third time that Jesus is calling disciples. And in discipleship, there was 3 stages in these disciples' lives, which I'll show you. But in those days is speaking of a certain time. It's about 20 months into Jesus' ministry. He went into a mountain. The mountain's not told because it's not important. You can pray on any mountain. Everybody's arguing over mountains. The Jews argue over Jerusalem. Now, I love all you people trying to keep all these feasts and festivals and Sabbath day. If you ever realize, this lady at the well, they said Mount Gerizim is where it's at. And the Jews are saying, "No, it's Jerusalem," and all this. And Jesus said, "It's neither. Come the day, it's spirit and in truth." If you ever realize that Jesus is your Sabbath, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden." And I understand the call for the Messianic Jews back in the book of Acts. We're trying to add all these things. So I understand the mindset because it's built within them. The Bible says they require a sign. And unfortunately, some people get a hold of that. If you ever realize that He is your Sabbath, He is your Sabbath. "Come unto me, all ye that labor." He was talking to them Jews trying to keep everything. He said, "I'll give you rest. My rest is a Sabbath." And it's a continual Sabbath. Is your rest. Someone need to hear that. And so they continued all night. So Jesus goes and continued all night in prayer to God. The Greek phrase is intertrinitarian holy communication. This is above my pay grade. This is one of the things I would love to go hear. If I could go back to certain places in the Bible, I would love to go back to some of these intertrinitarian prayers where Jesus all night prayed to God. Intertrinitarian, the Son of God, deity, God praying to God the Father all night. And as he's praying, and when it was day, so this is this prayer that's coming, and I would love to have heard that. Nothing's recorded about it. But right after that, he called unto him his disciples. He chose 12, whom also he named. This is the third and final step. I'll show you apostles. So, brief thing. Disciple is a follower or learner of Christ. So I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to ask you, are you a disciple of Christ? Well, you may be answering one way now, but let's wait 30 minutes from now. And let's see how we answer that. But allow the word of God and you being honest to answer that. Because a disciple is a follower of Christ. I'm not going to ask you if you're Christian. I done told it was dropped in my spirit coming Thursday. The Lord dropped the word on me and I was, in the Bible. And our problem in churches is we've got a bunch of church-going Christians. Church-going Christians is killing us. We got very few committed disciples. Very, very few. And I understand that. But I'm not trying to build a church on church-going Christians. There's plenty of them out there, and I'm not trying to be mean and anything like that. It's committed disciples. I'm going to show you that thousands were following Jesus for about 18 months. I mean, loving it. Fish and chips. Loving it. Church dinners. I mean, just they arguing over how that would even happen, and they were just loving it until Jesus said, oh, but to continue, you got to hate some things. Your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your wife, and yourself. Ugh. Then he says, oh, yeah, if you're going to follow me, you're going to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Yeah, I'm going to show that, John chapter 6. And it went from thousands to hundreds to about 12 that tried to stay in there. And so when he's calling, so a disciple is a follower of Jesus. But then he says he named them apostles. Now, just a quick lesson there. I don't have time to get on this. There's so much argument. There's 4 different types of apostles that's listed in the New Testament. There are the 12 apostles. You can read verses 14 and following. Then you find that Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. These two are in categories of their own. I do not think that those apostolics of those 2 categories is still in effect. I'll prove that. If they're still in effect, then your Bible is open-ended. Then we can still have chapters and stuff written in the Bible, which I do not. But there's a third one, Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is the apostleship that is still in operation. You can find him, and that's where he's a sent one. And he was sent. It's a very special thing. You can study on him. But the fourth one is false apostles. So 2 of those are still in effect. But these are distinct. They're called in a classification of their own. They are a distinct thing of apostleship, sent ones. And you didn't get to that point till you went through the first part. You had to go through some things to get there. And so with this in mind, I want to do a survey of these 12, and I'm so glad that God makes disciples out of ordinary folks, aren't you? Let me give you a few things. Let me notice the timing of this calling. There's 3 different callings. I've got them up for you. You can write them down and do a further study because I want to get to my last points where I'm going. In John chapter 1, you'll find where Jesus made an initial calling. Make straight the way of the Lord. But the first calling's into conversion of salvation. See, these guys had a level of knowledge because they were students. We know 6 of them for sure were students of John the Baptist. And as John was training these guys, here comes Jesus, and now he's saying, make straight the paths of the Lord. The only one that can make you straight this morning is Jesus Christ. You can't make yourself straight. You can't will it. You can't try to do enough good works. We can't baptize you enough to do that. You can't join this church that'll make you straight. It just won't do. What will make you straight is a relationship with Jesus Christ. That is the initial calling into discipleship. It starts with a relationship with Jesus Christ. This was early on in Jesus' ministry. The best I can see is this was starting at the baptism. Within the first 6 months of Jesus' ministry, he begins his initial calling of folk. And this calling is a conversion calling. It's making straight. That word make straights to line up. The way was a road. Roads coming into different cities would wash out. It was difficult to keep them. So when they would make straight means a dignitary was coming to your town and you was responsible for the roads coming into your town and you would go make them straight for that dignitary. And what John was saying is Jesus is coming into town, but he's going to turn and make your road straight by what he's about to do. He come to give men, women life and life more abundantly. So have you had a relationship with Jesus? The second calling goes on. This one takes place about 4 months after the first calling. When you look at the chronological order of the New Testament, it does take harmony and times to dive in, which I do not have the time to break that down. But understand there is a second calling where Jesus comes to these disciples and they've been converted, but they're still commercial fishermen. They're still not full-time following him around, as you would think. It did not happen. Sometimes we think, man, Jesus has come on the scene. He said, come follow me. And they dropped everything they did and just left. No, there was some background to that. That was logical. This was that didn't happen to the third meeting that this happened. But what it did do is Jesus was revealing himself. And his ministry up in Galilee. It was a popular ministry. So he was around Capernaum. And he was calling these guys, and when you read the context of Matthew 4 and Mark chapter 1, there's more intense commitment. So let me ask you something. Is there anything that you're doing differently than when you first got saved? Or are you you're doing the same stuff for 30 years? No growth. No, because see, when you walk with Jesus, change happens. It's not, well, I can't, no. When you walk with Jesus, change happens. This is more intense. They're still fished. But yet there was a more intense, there was more being aware of Jesus and his ways. There was more curiosity. It was going a little bit deeper. Aren't you glad that God didn't tell you everything that was wrong with you when you first got saved? He didn't reel it off. If he'd have revealed it all to me, I might have took off. We probably couldn't have handled that. Or if he'd have told you all that you was going to face. See, each one of these disciples, outside of one, would be martyred for their faith. Their third calling comes in Luke chapter 5 and chapter 6 that runs together. And when it's there, you'll see that this was the last 18 months. And in chapter 6, where I said in those days, where it says this in verse number 12, 5 and 6 coming together, is the fevered pitch. This 18 months before Jesus is crucified. These disciples went all in, and Jesus had 18 months with them. A lot of times we think it was 3 years. It was 18 months. In those days was the fevered pitch, anger and hostility against Jesus. At this time, Jesus had made his presence down in Jerusalem, ruffled every one of the Pharisees, Sadducees. The Sanhedrin was out. There was this hatred toward him with envy. Now he becomes a target. They're wanting to kill him. Now Jesus not only is the culture, because the Jews controlled the media, they controlled the newspapers, they controlled all of that. And they were turning it against Jesus. But then Jesus turned and started saying some hard sayings. So it wasn't just that the culture, and in those days when it was hostility toward him. So when there's a lot of hostility against Jesus, you're going to think, man, am I going to run with this guy? But on top of that, he now is making some demands upon them. But it says in Luke chapter 5, 4 to 11, when you study that, but they forsook all. There was another level of discipleship that these guys reached going forward. So the timing of their calling and this process of a calling, Jesus does it strategically and with wisdom. He brought different people into their lives at times and the stages to take them to different levels in them following Jesus. Notice the 12. Their names are mentioned here: Simon, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Simeon, Judas, and then Judas Iscariot. So a few things about the 12, not to get bogged down, but in choosing 12, that was purpose. Jesus was choosing these 12 because, see, when God comes and calls you, he's not wasting his time with you. It is purpose. These 12 were purposed. In Luke chapter 6, or Luke chapter 22, verses 29 through 30, you'll see that it's in judgment to the religious establishment of Judaism. They had become corrupt. They made their religion something of man that they could attain. All it was about was building the accounts and bank accounts of those in Jerusalem, and not an effect of what Judaism was established for. By the way, the law was never based to redeem anyone. It was just to show us our lack, that we couldn't. And so in choosing the 12, Christ was in fact appointing new leadership to a new covenant. You cannot put new wine in old wine skins. This is new. What Jesus is doing is new, and it represents, and the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and Sadducees knew the 12 was targeted to Israel in judgment against Judaism. That's why it behooves me why people go back to Judaism. It blows my mind. I can't comprehend it. Paul couldn't comprehend it. They were trying to put all of those laws and you got to be circumcised, you can't eat pork, and keeping the set. They tried to do that in the Jerusalem church, and that's the reason they couldn't be effective. Paul would come back making difference, missionary journeys, being beat by the gospel, seeing people saved. But when he come back, the Jews made him out to be something he wasn't. You can read about that in Acts chapter 15. This is a new covenant. What he is coming. God took common men and transformed them into uncommon instruments. You'll find in Corinthians that not many of this is called. Not many of this is called. It's not that God can't call a Pharisee and some of those things. I mean, Paul was that. But the initial 12, he's calling, he's showing things that these were common people who had struggles, who had their own things, and transformed them into uncommon instruments. God's favorite instruments is nobody's. God does not look for ability, rather availability. He didn't do this by choosing a military and doing it by military force. He didn't do a PR campaign. He didn't even choose a political party. He didn't do that. He didn't use but he used fallible men. No mob forces, but just men that chose to believe him. I repeat, a lot of my information comes from one of the greatest books on discipleship, 12 Ordinary Men by John MacArthur. I recommend that all read that. Listen to what he says in it. The future of the church and the long-term success of the gospel depended entirely on the faithfulness of that handful of disciples. There was no plan B if they failed. Let me ask you something. Wonder if the gospel right at that time was dependent on your faithfulness. Where would we be right now? If it was on my faithfulness, if the gospel, if the future of the church, and we can still say that now. Don't think that the church, you say, well, the church, the Bible says the gates of hell won't prevail against. I understand the body of believers, but there's a lot of churches closing their doors. Go through the 18 and 1900s in England. All those churches are clubs now. And places where they're going and trying to figure out what gender they are. They're trying to figure all of that and trying to get into all of, that's what their churches are right now. Don't tell me the devil is very bright and he's got this set where he comes in, he's slick. And you got to understand, That this thing is built on disciples and being faithful to that call. And if you and I are not going to be faithful disciples, then this thing can be a trading post. This could be one of the nicest trading post places in the world. I don't know what it could be. Because understand the churches is people built on faithfulness of individuals. So let's go on. That was the 12, and that was some of the reason. Notice their task. There was their task. The task in Matthew 28 is going and making disciples. To build the church, advance the kingdom. That's the reason I don't have time to be part of other organizations. Other people want me to be a part of this and be a part of that. Well, we build this and we build that and we help them, we help them. That's what we do at the church. Don't you love when people ask you at Dollar General and everyone else, you want to round up and give to them? I do give to them. It makes me feel sort of bad. But I do give. And I give to folks that know where it's going. And what I'm trying to say, there's a task for us to build. And the task is going and making disciples. And if the thing that I'm part of is not making disciples of Jesus, I don't want to be a part of it. Because it's not what I've called to do. If I'm going to maximize what I'm here for, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't mean that you're not if you go to work, but we can make disciples even there. So I'm not talking about your vocation and things. I'm talking about organization. God had the church here. And the church is to make disciples, and it is a constant process. So if you want to tap in and really tap into the joy of the Lord flooding your soul, be a part of the task, be a disciple, and make a disciple. Now, that sounds good. Let's dive into the actual. Turn to Luke chapter 9. I was going to look at a verse here. This is where I was sort of wanting to get to in Luke chapter number 9. And verse number 23. We'll refer to some other verses, but this is the one. He's straightly charging them in verse 21. And commanded them, this is his disciples, they're narrowed down now. He says in verse 22, here's what he's telling the disciples, they got them narrowed down. You think it would get easier, but it don't. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and the chief priests, the scribes, and be slain. But he told them, I'm going to rise on the third day. So here's what he told the disciples. Guys, you're looking at me, everybody looking at me. Okay. Make sure you pay attention. You can be looking at somebody, but you're really not listening. Not that any of you were doing that here this morning. But, I have taught some folk. I'll teach something. They're looking right at me. Then I ask them. They say, I'm sorry. What would you say? So he said, I want you to listen. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be slain, and they're going to kill me. But that's not the end of the story. I will be raised on the third day. You see that? Then he says, now if any of you want to follow me, they're going to kill you. Wait a minute. Come on, Jesus. So let's talk about some cross training. Let's talk what it is to turn our world upside down. When it says that these men were this and turned the world upside down, that didn't just happen. It was a process of becoming the disciple that when they were unleashed in their culture and at their job, in their community, it turned it upside down. So if we're not turning stuff upside down, that means we got a bunch of church-going Christians and very few committed disciples. Committed disciples turns the world upside down. That wasn't just a book of Acts things. That's the whole church period thing. So how can we do that? Let's get into the training. I like training. I was close to becoming a trainer with the CrossFit stuff several years back, but then I found out it was a $1,500 fee, and I thought, well, forget that. I like taking kids, and so I love the athletic analogy here. Notice the first one, if any man will come after me, the first thing that I'm going to show you is you got to press forward with a short memory of things behind. You say, what are you saying? If any man will come after me, the Greek phrase is interesting. It means forgetting things in the past. Do you know that in this journey of us being disciples, you're going to fall? In your discipleship, in your training program, you're going to fall. You're going to have some failures. The question is, you're going to get back up and keep going. You're going to have some injuries. People start, and if they're not trained right, they come in, and boy, they're ready to lift weight way too heavy than they can handle. I seen them come in, and I was working at the gym in Lenore, and these guys will come in. You got to watch guys because they're coming in. They're wanting to take the weight and take it up over their head. And this certain movement, it takes a lot of stress on your shoulders. Sir, you can't do that, but just do the bar. You can't. But coming in with all this zeal and no knowledge, and next thing you know, he's putting 245 plates on each side, comes up, boom, shoulder gone. Major injury. Because he's trying to lift something he's not ready for. See, a lot of young Christians in your discipleship, you see somebody else doing something. They've been doing it for about 15 years or 10 years. And they perfected the craft, and so you got to train in. And so there's some things. So when you try, injuries will come. Disappointments will come, failures will come. The question is how short is your memory of your failures? See, it was hard for me to train some athletes, especially ones that were good, in a game. There was one kid in particular, if he missed his first shot, I knew I was going to struggle with him the rest of the game. Because he kept that missed shot in his mind the whole time. See, a good athlete has short memories. I didn't say that, Kobe Bryant did. Who was, in my opinion, I don't know why, he's not talked about as being up there as the best basketball player. But he said you got to have a short memory. You know why? Because if you shoot 30% from the floor, you've had a good night. That means you're missing 7 out of 10. And so you got to have a short memory. If that didn't work, then you've got to be able to reflect. Now listen what this phrase is used again in Philippians chapter number 3. As it relates to pressing forward with a short memory. If you're going to get in this thing, you are going to have some failures. You are going to fall. You're going to have some injuries. But are you going to have a short memory? I tell every athlete, listen, you are going to get blocked. If you're playing against good teams, you are going to get dunked on. Now, if you're playing against some good teams, you're going to get dunked on. You're going to get crossed over. You're going to make a bad pass. You're going to miss a layup that you make normally 99%. That stuff happens. But if you carry that the rest of the game, then you're going to cause us to lose. You've got to be able to have a short memory and say, next play. So you would hear me when I'm coaching, and I would see things. I tried not to amp them up because they're already beating themselves down. So if they see me and they miss a shot they should have made, I'm not over saying, what are you doing? You're crazy. They're doing that to themselves. I wish parents would do that. I tell you, it took me all afternoon to get over Sadie's indoor soccer game yesterday. They're doggone, what grade is she in? These are 4th and 5th graders. And those parents drove. I was like, I hadn't been in this game long. You know, I was a coach and all that, but now come from a parent standpoint, I'm watching it, and I'm like, I was doing pretty good, and then these people got a little crazy, and I'm thinking, man, they're 4th and 5th grade. They're trying to kick the ball. They're just trying to get the fundamentals, and they're like bringing the pressure. I mean, they're bringing all this pressure. Get on, ref, get out of the way. You can't see. I'm like, what is going on? Then you see the kids get amped up. Now the kids are over pushing on each other and tripping and kicking and fighting, and it started with these crazy parents in the stands. And I wanted to stand up and say, knock it off. But I sit there and kept my mouth shut, and I was amped up. It took me 4 hours to get over it. I had to drink coffee and doggone it. I was like, man. So you got to have some things getting over and past. Listen at Philippians 3:13. This is the same phrase where it says, come after me. You're going to be a disciple. The first thing you got to do is you've got to have a short memory. Paul said it this way. In Philippians 3, verse 12, it says, but I followed after Christ when I was arrested. Now, with the folks I got before me, when I say arrested, that makes some of you nervous. Paul said he got arrested the right way. Jesus arrested him, apprehended him. But then in verse number 13, it says, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth into those things which are before. In the next verse, he says, pressing forward toward a mark of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. So there's got to be that Paul said I had to get to the point where I was forgetting things. See, there's some things you got to forget, and there's some things you don't need to forget, right? You forget the things where you failed. Paul said I had to get to the point to understand why I was converted, why he called me, and then I was forgetting things where I had failed. Paul, read Romans chapter 7. Well, you can reach forward, you got to forget some things. Have a short memory. And that's the easiest one. The second one is let him, notice in verse 23, the first one, have a short memory. The second one, I'm talking to people, it's training. If you're not training and you just, when it's the right and the stars line up and all that and you come to church, I ain't talking to you. All right? I mean, I love you with everything that's within me. I just don't want to go to battle with you. All right, in this war. I want to go with some folk, and maybe you want to start. Well, I hope you do. But I want to be fair and be honest with you and tell you what you're looking at. You got to have a short memory. The second thing is let him deny himself. You mean I got to deny myself in a selfish world? When I'm selfish, which is my problem. Do you know that when I'm offended, if someone says something to me and I get offended, because we're living in the day now where somebody disagrees with someone, that's it, I'm done, I'm out. Done. That stuff tears me up because I used to be that. I was talking with a guy this past week and had that thing about rubbed off on me. And that's God's thing I'm doing. And I had that, and I was like, man, and so I was able to actually help him see some things, but you got to deny. He said, if I'm offended, it's not you, it's me. Did you know that Jesus was never offended? He knew it didn't mean that his life and what he said didn't offend people, but he was never offended. If I'm offended, it's not you. Even you, wonder if I call you a this and this. Wonder if I say that your head, like my mama used to say to me, you look like a Volkswagen with the doors open. See, I've had that at me, so there's nothing you can say to me offend me. So thanks, Mom. You helped me out a lot when I was a kid. If you're offended, it's you. It's not because why? Because you're not disconnected from yourself. The second thing is disconnect from yourself. Paul said it this way in Galatians, I'm crucified with Christ, but nevertheless, I'm living. There's got to be a disconnect from oneself, which is very hard to do since 2008. Can I quote Dr. Phil? I love me some Dr. Phil. Look at me. Only because he's about to launch his new network. Dr. Phil said, I've been waiting for years. He said, their media's been suppressing stuff and the news suppressing stuff and all this. And his wife looked at him and said, well, you're the media. Why don't you do something about it? And he said, okay, I will. And he's starting his new media production. But he was saying some things. He said, they won't let me release some things. They, meaning the powers be, the media. Since 2008, since cell phones has been released into the hands, and that was purposed by the Chinese. I don't want to get into but inundating people, and then their lives just live on it. He said we become the most selfish. This is Dr. Phil. It's not me. I don't know anything about that. He's a brain guy. And he seems to make sense when he talks. Since that, we become the most selfish group of people, only concerned about ourselves, living for people that you'll never meet, and living lives through other people. Now your happiness and your sad and your emotions and your feelings is based on how you compare yourself to the people that you were following. And then he said that in LA and other places throughout the country, that people was buying planes. There's money in, maybe that's what we need to do. We need to buy us a plane, put it in a hangar over here where people can come and take selfies inside the plane like they're on a private plane. They're paying money for that. These companies is making enough money to buy the plane, buy the airplane hangar, and make money off folks because we're so wanting to compete and be like something that we're going inside of a plane, taking a few selfies of ourselves, and paying $3,200. Blows my mind. But that's the power. I'm telling you, Satan is crafty and getting us into ourselves. And I sure hope the church has not been pulled in that world, because part of discipleship is denying yourself. We got to step back and deny ourselves. That's a difficult thing because I love me some self. I don't know if you love you or not, but I love me some self. I look after myself. Boy, that might cause me some harm. I think about those things. Denying and disconnecting, difficult thing, but it is the process. In other words, what Jesus is saying Jesus, you're God. You work miracles. You have the authority in you to speak the word and everybody would die. Why would you go and die and let people beat and spit and slay you, just terribly in Jerusalem? Because he didn't disconnect it from himself. He didn't come for himself. He came for you and I. And when we start living for others outside of ourselves, we're starting to feel the discipleship that Jesus is speaking to these men. There is a disconnect from self. Let me go to the next point. Now, let him take up his cross daily. Boy, you want to circle that. I'm calling this walk under the weight daily. You know, a lot of Christians, unfortunately, don't get the Rambo personality. You know, that mowing everybody down, getting a hold of a 50 cal and shooting. There's something about that I like. Not shooting people, but I just like to get a hold of it and shoot a bunch of, something. Not folk. I like that. They juice them up and spray them. They go through programs and, man, and all that goes into that. But unfortunately, Christians get it. We're weak, we're feeble, we got to have, a crutch of Bible and faith and all that type of stuff. Well, I'm going to tell you, some of the stoutest men and women that I know is people who are disciples of Jesus Christ. Because they're up underneath the weight daily. They don't run out from underneath that weight. This weight that's underneath us. You say, what weight are you talking about? What is he talking about? Well, notice, take up, that's your choice. Now, he's putting this before you, but are you going to take it up? Am I going to take it up? It's an option. Take up, notice, his cross. Now, I've wrestled with that. I've wrestled because, I hear the ordinary teaching of that. Everyone's got their own cross to bear it. I don't think that's what it is. The more I've studied it, and I know I've got different people, but I think the cross he's talking about is the one back in the previous verses. We're picking up his cross. What I'm trying to say is his cross is his cross. In other words, the weight that we're carrying is we're bringing what would Jesus do in every facet of our life. You don't think that's weighty? Then do it. Then do it when you want to lash out at someone because they wronged you. But you know what Jesus done in that situation? That's a weight. You want to get in this thing, and everybody says, well, I can just preach. Well, do that, and watch the stuff that comes at you to reject temptation that comes at you so heavy that it makes you want to fall to your knees, to act what Jesus did and deny it. That's a difficult thing. To deny your anger and the way you've always responded to that coworker. It keeps getting under your skin and keeps saying things, and you keep fighting back until you carry the weight. What would Jesus do? And you turn your back on that. You start acting differently. That is carrying weight. You say, how often do I do that? I do it daily. This is a daily grind where you go in when we say that. I was being perfectly honest with the team in the coffee room. I think it was Thursday as I come in, I just felt the word monk. It's a word that we're using, monk. Does anyone know if you feel monked up? You know what that means? I didn't feel a bit saved. I wasn't spiritual. I'm very happy that no one pulled out in front of me coming in on Thursday. I'm glad I didn't get behind no women trying to merge on the 4-lane. Because times I let you off, and then there's times I just can't handle it. I was in one of those. No reason. Nothing to that. I was just in one of that. So I've done my routine. It's a good time for me I put the Bible on. It takes me about 25, 30 minutes to get here. So it's a good time for me and I started just doing my routine. I'm listening to a book of the Bible, and I do it in multiple translations. I do it multiple times. And Romans got over there, and that thing stuck in me that we have a confident hope. And just when it said it, it just hit me. Boy, this hope ain't built on how you feeling this morning. That you feeling all saved. And you don't always feel jacked up spiritually because there's a weight that's on us. When you're in this thing, my biggest sympathy is people. When I hear of a pastor or someone falling, don't come to me trying to talk down about anyone like that. You don't know the weight people carry. Now, if you're in your world and you're never carrying a weight, you're just a judgmental person. That's another one I carry weight. I got to walk away from that. When it says take up your cross, it's bringing Jesus into every situation of your life, your relationships, your friends, any organization you're a part of. I'm talking about there's no back doors. With Jesus, there's no secret rooms. That you're bringing him into every aspect of your life, and then you put up the weight of what Jesus did, and he gives you the strength to carry, but it's a weight. And we do it daily. So it's taking up his cross. Listen, I'll put all the band, listen, I love them. What would Jesus do? But live that out. That's very weighty, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're going to be a disciple of Christ, you get up underneath that. Jesus said another thing, not only is it walking under the weight, but it's also following him. It's walking the way Jesus is going. When it says follow me, it means there's a lot of rerouting that needs to take place in your life. Now, if you're telling me that you've never been rerouted in your life, then that means you walk, then it means you, Jesus. Are you telling me you Jesus? That you know everywhere Jesus is going? Or are you going one way, and Jesus said, no, I'm going this way, now which way are you going? Paul was going up into Bithynia, right? And the Holy Ghost revealed and said, no, I'm not going that way. I'm going over toward Macedonia. Boy, I'm glad he listened, and he did. You're going to be a disciple of him. There's rerouting that takes place. Are you willing to be rerouted in your life? Follow me. Jesus is going here, I must needs go here, and I'm going here. If you're going to follow me, you're coming with me. But Jesus, I don't like going that way. The Samaritans live there. If you're going to follow me, you're going to go the direction that I'm going. There's some things that I'm going to be doing that you would never do, and that's the reason I'm God, and you need to follow me. See, there's some things that you never thought you would do. If you follow Jesus, you would do. Like saying, I'm sorry. Like I'm saying, because Jesus goes that route. Jesus don't avoid anyone. He'll go right there to that person in need. And when we're following him, it takes us to people in need. God's got a great thing when we follow him. Now notice Jesus said in John 6:56, I told you that earlier, unless you eat my flesh, drink my blood. What's he talking about? When you follow him and his word, you're digesting it. He's not talking about cannibalism there. That was a Jewish innuendo that you are consuming and taking. You hear me say something, if you digest it, you receive it in your spirit. If you say, that dude is meddling and I'm mad at him and I don't like him, I can't wait to get out of here, you're not receiving it. And a lot of people did not receive it because in John chapter 6 and verse 66, many walk no more with him. I can't follow you there. I don't like that group of people. I'm not going to follow you to Samaria. I don't like them. Well, then you're only going to go so far. But the thing is, if you're not following him and Jesus going this direction, you're going here, then you're following your own steps and your own, and we'll see where that goes. You're going to wind up in a mess. So God's got the steps here of following him. So let me ask you something. You've been rerouted lately? I get rerouted like daily. I mean, just rerouted. Sometimes it's my, you ever had going somewhere and your phone starts rerouting because you're somewhere you haven't been before? See, that's some of our problems. We think we know where we're going. See, this is a new thing. You say, well, I know how it's doing because churches run like it. No. This is a new thing, man. God gives new songs. He gives some new stuff. And we got to be willing to follow him. So when have you been rerouted last? Let me conclude with this. As a matter of fact, the group can start coming up here. There's a show that me and my girls like to watch. We get a chance. It's called Triple D on the Food Network. Some of you was like, yeah, I know that show. He done a 10-year thing that and it stands for diners, drive-ins, and dine. He goes to all these different restaurants. He went back and seen restaurants that his show had visited 10 years later. And when he went back to the shows in which he would do, Guy Fieri, his name's, when he went back to the restaurants that his show featured, they had tripled, quadrupled, bought new restaurants. The advertisement was so powerful, it overloaded them that many of them opened up new stores, all right, and places. because they're seeing it. There was an attraction. Wow, I want a burger like that. The one I get's all mugged up. I want that one. I want something that looks like that. Boy, I want some spaghetti like that. I want some cube steak like that. You say, what are you saying? There's an attraction that was put out and people drove. They were talking to people. I drove for 3 hours to get here and eat this spaghetti, this lasagna. You know what's going to draw people here? It's not a dynamic sermon because you're going to hear very few. It's not a great preacher, but I'm going to tell you what people's going to come and see here. It's triple D. Devoted, diligent disciples. They're going to come and see. Well, I know them. They was just some ordinary folk. I know what they struggle with. I watched them, and all of a sudden things just changed in their life. Now they become devoted. They're different. He don't speak that way. He's not doing, not as based on work, but there's discipleship that's took place. That's what people's going to come and see. That when my words match my walk, there's a power in that. That's discipleship. God's wanting to do great things in their lives. Are you a devoted, diligent disciple? I pray that get on that journey. See where you are. You may be in stage 1. You got to forget about some hurts and past. You can't go on because people in church is not playing, all that type of stuff. And I heard that so-and-so, all that. You still on step 1. You got to forget some things because it's not about other people anyway. Who are you following? Well, I sure hope you ain't following the man. You're following Jesus. And then he puts people in your life. So get over that. Maybe you're at step 2 where you got to start disconnecting from yourself. I get so much of myself, I get sick. Maybe at your point, you got to get up underneath that load. And it's heavy sometimes, isn't it? My flesh sometimes want to throw that road and say, that's how Jesus would act. Let me show you how Sean would act. Go karate on somebody. Or maybe the Lord's wanting to reroute you and you're frustrated about it. Hey, let's follow him. You're not going to go wrong. Let's trust in God. He's faithful to us. Father, in Jesus' name, in this Christian, really in this following you, that's what we are. We're followers. We're believers. Help us in this maximize our journey here. And we maximize and make a difference when we're making disciples. When we are being discipled and discipling others, God, we are building the church. We're advancing the kingdom. We're doing the work of the Lord. Help us be disciples in Jesus' name. Let's stand to our feet.